on how to arouse motivation and energy for using the various techniques that cultivate awareness?
Well, you know, what, from my experience, when you, by following that pattern of Four Noble Truths, you know, you begin to get this feeling of observing, and instead of just thinking about Dhamma, you're applying it, you're putting it, internalizing it. So you're not trying to define dukkha and get the proper English equivalent and what's the cause of dukkha and things like this as something intellectual and external, but you start observing, just like I became aware of just the sense that even when my life was all right, you know, a sense of anxiety or kind of you know, that was not caused by anybody or anything, just a habit pattern of thinking and worrying about the future, or self-consciousness, being concerned with what people think of me and things like this, where, you know, your own kind of personality, how it operates. And just where before I'd been more like psychotherapeutic about it, I found that this way was much more helpful, rather than trying to make it into anything complicated, just to observe, just this general feeling of dis-ease or doubt, uncertainty, and also just to know what kind of character you have. Not to criticize it, but to, you know, to be aware where you kind of lose it, where you're hurt the most, where you're most vulnerable, and so you start taking an interest, not in a personal way, but in this Dhamma way, and you begin to change from analyzing it on a personal level or psychological level to seeing it in terms of arising, ceasing, conditioned phenomena, and you're also more interested in its cessation, rather than trying to get rid of it, you know, trying to suppress it or run away. You're more, you know, you'll develop more kind of patience with even unpleasant mental states and kind of bear with them till they naturally cease. And then you get insight, these insights, the 12 insights through the Four Noble Truths. I found it, you know, it's like a revelation, because, you know, I always saw things too personally, took everything too, I was a strong egotistical character, and so everything was you know, made my life quite unbearable, not because of anybody persecuting me particularly, but just these tendencies and obsessions around myself. And just that shift, if you notice, like the First Noble Truth, there is dukkha, there is suffering, and then suffering should be understood. So that the first insight is like a Bhariyati Dhamma. It's just a statement. There is dukkha, and then the second aspect is it should be understood, and then third is the insight, it has been understood. And so that sequence is all the Four Noble Truths. Each truth has that pattern of the three aspects, and that is a reflective style. You know, it's not just stating what you should believe or you agree or disagree with. It's just pointing to something that is quite easy to observe, suffering in yourself, and then that should be understood. How do you understand it? By analyzing it, blaming it on somebody or God or yourself or whatever. Or in this way, it means changing from dismissing it or thinking about analyzing it to observing. Because that's the Patipatha. So for each noble truth, there's the Bhariyati, Bhati, and Bhatiweti. These are the Pali terms. And it's like a paradigm or a pattern that encourages us to reflect on something that is quite ordinary in anyone's life. And we're changing from just the kind of personal reactions to suffering, or ignoring it, or suppressing it, or blaming it, to observing it. And that's why it's a noble truth, because when you think of it, what's noble about suffering? Most of it is something none of us like or want, but it's like the sense of nobility, a sense of you changing from this kind of person blaming suffering on others or conditions to observing it. That's a shift. That's an important kind of quantum leap from worldly conditioning to Dhamma, to seeing things in terms of Dhamma rather than according to the way you're culturally programmed to see things. And like suffering tends to be, from in the Western world, very much something that, we've got this idea we should be happy, and if we're suffering, there's something wrong with us, we should go to a psychotherapist and take drugs and get away. Or people blame God. They say, how can you do this to me? You should have made everything nice for me, and instead you put a curse on my life. That's one way. There's nothing noble in that. But when you think of an Arya Satya, or a noble truth, it's something in us that rises up in a more mature way to look at suffering in terms of Dhamma rather than just habitual reactions to discomfort, disease, fear, and desire. And as you trust it more, the inside first, you start out with the Bhariyati Dhamma, with there is suffering. Well, that kind of triggers it, gives you the suggestion. But it's not like a dogma you have to believe in. It's not like you have to believe in the first noble truth. It's just pointing at something so ordinary in anyone's life, and then changing your response to it. Instead of reacting, you're studying it, investigating it, looking at it. And then as you do that, you begin to see, the sequence of how the habitual thinking process. We create. We live in a deluded world. Actually, the society. That's why the politics and economics are a mess, because everybody's deluded. Nobody knows what they're doing. So then you all have various views and opinions about what government should be, and what the economy should be, and have wars, and it goes on endlessly in that vein. But this is like an awakening. So you can't expect the government to do this. But this is why it's to be known by oneself alone. Like Bhajitang, Vaitila Povinili. It's something you have to see for yourself. And as you begin to appreciate that, you find it, you begin to trust it. Because you do begin to, you're changing your attitude towards yourself, towards the world, towards everything, from just the ordinary reactive, your own personal, habitual emotional reactions to life, whatever they might be, or cultural biases or expectations. You're not trying to criticize that or make any, but being the observer of it. It's like mindfulness gives you putting it in terms like it opens this door to a kind of universal intelligence. We're conditioned when we're born, like a baby's born, and then you're conditioned by first your mother. She's the main influence in the beginning years of your life, and her feelings, her cultural attitudes, her identities, and your family, your father, family, and social identity is instilled in those early years of childhood. And so you form your worldview from that. And then that tends to operate throughout your life, that basic conditioning. And the only way one can get out of and to see that conditioning is not to find something else, other conditioning, but to observe it. And so instead of being just a kind of conditioned person that's operating by a program that you didn't even ask for, you start getting behind it, and that like mindfulness is transcending the conditioning of your mind. And then you begin to, once you see that, you trust it more and more, because you think there's nothing else you can trust. Conditions, governments, politics, other people, we want to find somebody, another person we can put our trust in, and inevitably we become disappointed, and everything, that we want to give us security will inevitably disappoint us or fail us. And so, because that's the nature of this realm, it's incessant change, and there's no way you can make it the way you want it, but you can do this. And I found that, by practicing with that over the years, because I caught on very quickly, and before I even met Ajahn, the Sumedho, I did almost a year of just reflecting on these noble truths, and I began to see, I began to get more confident how to use that rather than just, see it from this Buddhism or Buddhist teaching or Buddhist doctrine. Because it's very clear, it's a practical tool. It's not meant to be a metaphysical teaching or theory of any sort. So it's like a noble truth rather than ultimate truth. But it's like the Buddha taking something so banal, so ordinary as dukkha, and then from that kind of very ordinary experience, it takes you, if you follow the Four Noble Truths pattern, takes you to the path, to deathless reality. And but each truth has its, like second and third noble truths are about the cause and the cessation. Well, I found, like emotions, and that oftentimes arise just through conditions like anger. Somebody can do something or say something, and you just feel it before you even know it. You feel this anger, and then I began to, I used to try to suppress anger and try to, push it away or take it too personally. Feel like I shouldn't be angry. Anger is a personal weakness and something wrong. Well, in other words, then I began to just, through the Noble Truth and through this reflection on the dependent origination, I began to see anger no longer as something personal, when the conditions for anger arise, and this is what you feel. And even like something like that arises very quickly, at that point where you suddenly beware, you're feeling angry like this, then you can cut the chain, cut the momentum of that habit right at that point with mindfulness. Because you suddenly, instead of like suppressing it, trying to deny it, or believe it and just follow it, those are the two extremes. But this way, even if you say something, tell somebody off in anger or hit them, there's always a point where you suddenly realize, and that point is that actually an awakened state where you suddenly realize anger. And then not to see it in terms of some kind of personal defect, because then you're making it more than what it actually is. But trusting your mindfulness of it feels like this. Anger is a strong emotion, you feel it in your body, it's hot, it's exciting and things like this, so it's easy to recognize. But then the ones that are, I found, like my big obstruction was doubt. I'm a real doubter, and so I get angry, lust and things like that, but they had the lopa dosa moha. I contemplated these three: greed, hatred, and delusion, and I decided, well, I think my biggest problem is delusion. And so I really took an interest in it. And then like my early acquaintance before I came into the Theravada world was through Zen, Japanese Zen, which I never practiced, but I read a lot of that kind of literature. And of course they use doubt a lot in the koan, and deliberately throw yourself into a state of uncertainty and doubt quite intentionally. And then you begin to, this mindfulness practice, you begin to observe this feeling of uncertainty, doubt is like this. You can begin to recognize it, this kind of confusing, foggy feeling of insecurity, doubt. And then you change from being someone who claims doubt as your personal problem to being one who uses doubt as a way of investigating the noble truth. So that's why each one of us has our own particular karma to deal with. The Four Noble Truths is a nice, neat pattern that but it's not meant to be like only one way of doing it, where the way I've done it is the way you should do it. But it's taking something like dukkha that we all have experience, and how to change from running away, blaming, reacting to it, to using it. And then Ajahn Chah was always very praising monks who develop their own upayas or skillful means. As sometimes, that's why you have to really observe, not critically observe yourself, but observe the preferences, tendencies, obsessions, not to make any judgment, but so you can actually see them in terms of mental objects rather than as personal problems. And then over the years, you apply that to whatever's happening in your life. So, like the stories about establishing Wadanacha. I like solitude. I like going off in kuti and practicing alone, and then suddenly I'm head of a community. And that brings up certain anxieties and fears and doubts. But then the point is to be able to use that while you're on the job. You know, I don't have to run away to the forest to do it but it's like in the middle of it, in the middle of a storm, you begin to observe it rather than just run away from it. And they had one of these Tibetan. I remember seeing this, it says a lotus blooming in the midst of an inferno is indestructible. Then you have this picture of this inferno, there's fire, and then this lotus flower in the middle of this inferno. So then you contemplate. The lotus is a delicate thing, and the inferno is very strong, hot, destructive, and powerful. And then in the middle of this is the lotus, which is very delicate. And so then I use this as a reminder that sometimes you find yourself in the midst of an inferno. A lot of confusing things, demands, and that come your way, and then, but something like that, I'd remember the lotus in the midst of all that. And that's mindfulness to me. The lotus is like, I really equate with mindfulness. It's indestructible. No matter what the inferno going on outside, mindfulness is indestructible. And that you begin to trust that and develop it, cultivate it. After a while, mindfulness becomes more like a continuity. At first, it's just more like flashes or insights, and then you're back into the old pattern. But as you begin to appreciate this and trust it, then you find that mindfulness is the ability to stay with something as it arises and ceases, no matter whether it's a subtle or coarse condition. So then developing the path is more like samadhi, the fourth noble truth is, samadhi, right understanding, you have this right understanding, and then it should be developed. So the insight into the fourth noble truth is bhavana, practice, develop, cultivating it. So then you determine to cultivate that, no matter what's happening. So then, I was here 2 years, and then I went to England, and then I made that my priority. This mindfulness is a priority. Because here I was going, to a situation I didn't know, and my nature, my personal tendency would be to worry and anticipate and create all kinds of possible scenarios of success and failure, and that on a personal level my mind proliferates in that way, worries about failing. So I had to make this the strong determination, the lotus in the midst of the inferno, mindfulness, no matter what, if they're torturing you or nailing you to a cross or burning the stake, always be mindful. And nothing like that ever happened, but you're really challenged a lot. You recognize both from external and by your own personal tendencies and habits, fears. But it's all past knowledge. Once you trust it, you can use whatever happens to you.